Okay, shifting gears into our first afternoon panel. This is going to be a good one. If you've ever started something big or thought about it, chances are some of the things we touched on just in that last few-minute segment might have paralyzed you or made you think twice. The ambiguity involved, the uncertainty, fear of failure, actually failing. These are all very real and very normal parts of the entrepreneurial journey. So what we're here to do now is tap the deep expertise and experience of some of our most veteran social entrepreneurs. They're going to share what they've learned and how to deal with uncertainty, complexity, and failure. We're joined by Joy Elise Davis, founder, partner, and principal at Design Culture Lab. Goon Denhart, founder of Hannah Anderson, and Scott Hamlin, co-founder of LoopedWorks. To guide us through these important narratives, I'm pleased to introduce David Sawyer. David has been an advisor with Impact Entrepreneurs from the beginning. He's a self-described strategy guy for a better world, and indeed he is. He's played key roles in all kinds of fields, including education reform, national service, social entrepreneurship, venture philanthropy, impact investing. His recent work has focused on systems change for oceans, girls and women, regions and cities. Over to you, David, to bring up your panel. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. David Sawyer here, strategy guy for a better world, as you've heard. So, there are three outstanding impact entrepreneurs here on stage with you, people who have committed their lives and careers to unleashing the power of business for social and environmental impact. And they are amazing. And there are also some amazing people in this room. And just to keep the activity going here after lunch, I'm going to ask you a few questions, and if these categories apply to you, would you please quickly just stand up? So how many people in the room are college students? Please stand up. Awesome. Sit down. I heard there were some high school students here. Is that true? High school students? Come on. Excellent. I'm liking it. All right. If you are an educator, somebody helping to promote this kind of work in the world, would you please stand up? Educators, thank you. If you are an advisor, a funder, a supporter, somebody who believes in this work and in one way or another supports it, would you please stand up? Very good. All right. If you are someone who has not yet, but would like to launch a social enterprise or some kind of effort that unleashes the power of business for a better world, would you please stand up? If you want to do this with your life and career. And finally, if you are already doing this, if you're one of those people who have dedicated yourselves to this kind of an important endeavor, at a critical moment on the planet, by the way, would you please stand up if you're doing it? So I think everybody here knows, or they will shortly know, that entrepreneurship, especially entrepreneurship for social or environmental impact, is hard, it's messy, it's not easy. There are failures, there are triumphs, there are sleepless nights, there are all sorts of efforts to work smart, stay resilient, stay the course, and it takes a special kind of person to do this. In some ways, entrepreneurs are like elite athletes. They work hard, they train hard, they need coaches, and they've got to stay in the game for the long haul. So, the first question I sort of want to get to these people, builds on a little model that I'd like to share with you. Think of this as sort of 5 phases of the entrepreneurial life cycle. Phase 1, you've got an idea, you've got a concept for some new product or service, or some new way to bring a product and service into the world. Phase 2, startup. You get a little money, you know, you're in the garage, you're sleeping under your desk, you're making it happen. Phase 3, this is the unglamorous phase. This is the systems building, getting management and paperwork and technology and all of the sort of systems buildings things, both human and technological and infrastructure and facilities in space. And this is a phase that people often dodge, overlook, or do not take seriously enough. And the jump between startup and systems building is kind of like crossing the chasm. And it happens in the nonprofit world and it happens in the for-profit world. If you build the systems, then you get to high performance. And suddenly, you've got a vibrant, humming machine and you're out there kicking butt and doing what you came here to do. But phase 5, also important. You have to constantly reinvent yourself and not get sleepy and continue to innovate and look out ahead. When you get that whole cycle moving, then you've dialed it in. And so my opening question in that context to these 3 amazing impact entrepreneurs is, given your journey as an entrepreneur, what are the 3 most important things you've learned that you would like to share with this audience? And Gun, we're going to start with you.
3 things that I learned. When I was thinking of this, I thought the most important thing I actually learned was to get to know myself. We had some ups and downs, and through that whole thing, I grew up. Number 2, the most important thing you can do in business is to stay in business. You might think that your social mission is the most important thing, but unless you have a viable business, it's not worth anything. So the most important thing you can do is to stay in business. And finally, I would say, don't listen to everybody you're talking to. And why? Well, should I tell the story? Okay. So before we started Hannah Anderson, a clothing company local here, we were just on fire, and many of you can relate to that. I would talk to anyone who wanted to talk to me. You know, what do you think, and is this something you think is going to be possible? And I talked to a friend of mine who was a business person and who I respected a lot, and he said, I don't think you should do it. And I looked at him and he said, I think you're too old. I was 38 years old at the time.
All right, Scott.
Wow, how to follow up on that. The 3 easy takeaways from my side, if I looked at it, and it kind of dovetails off of what Gun said on knowing yourself, but it's more of asking yourself the right questions. You want to understand the reasons that you're doing what you're doing, and there needs to be a lot of passion and a lot of really true foundational belief in what you're doing, because as Dave said, this is a long haul. Even the quote-unquote overnight successes in tech world and things like that are not so overnight as they appear. And you'll have those days, you'll have those pitfalls, and you'll have those challenges, and you need to be able to say, I am totally committed to what I'm doing, and I'm passionate about what I'm doing, and asking yourself the right questions. And if the right questions are, I want to do this because I want to make as much money as in the shortest period of time, there's a model for that. If there's, I want to change the world or impact my community or whatever that is, there's models for that as well. And so that is a really important, for me, a really important takeaway. The second one that I had was around, also on a similar note to Gun, was one of our advisory board members says it all the time, no margin, no mission. And for our standpoint, it's understanding not only how you run a business, take the social impact piece, the environmental impact piece out of it first. Are you prepared to actually run a business that is going to be financially viable? And in a lot of cases, in our case, for example, we need to scale our business, and scaling those businesses, because sometimes an impact can be done one-to-one with one individual. In our case, we're taking on the second largest industry in the world and the second dirtiest industry in the world. And we have to be able to have a big voice in order to do that. So that piece of it is really important. And I got to get back to my notes because here we go. And the last one was when you start this off, is to think big but act small. I can't tell you the number of companies that I've seen that go out and they get the fancy office space and they hire a lot of people and they pay a lot of money, and then they get the kegerator and the ping pong table and everything else, and it's like, hey, we're a startup. And 9 months later, they're out of business. So you really have to think about this in a responsible way, and yes, you want to have big, scalable ideas, but you also want to be able to act small and go, okay, I'm going to take this little step, I'm going to test it. If it works, then I'm going to keep doing that, and I'm going to slowly grow it and gradually grow it, because so many times people just say, hey, I have an idea and I have a few people that I think are going to really like this, and they go. And that's a challenge.
Thank you. Joy.
Hello, everyone. My 3 things. First, definitely we're going to talk about this later, but failing harder. Everyone knows that phrase. But for us, Design Culture Lab, we wanted to be a lab on purpose. We wanted to try out new things, investigate, and fail, and adapt. And for us, that's a really, big, important thing. And I had to learn through that process. Sometimes we fail publicly. Sometimes it's just me with my team. So that's a really big thing that I've learned. I've also learned to invest in my team. I think when I first started, I was very naive in our roles, and we're just going to do it. Like, we're just going to both be kind of share responsibilities and not have really clear roles. So I'm sure we're going to talk more about teams later as well. But for me, investing in my team was really important for me to learn. And then lastly, just feeling confident in yourself and knowing when to stand tall. I think a lot of the time, my background is in nonprofit management and volunteerism and activism, and I'm very used to shrinking myself in situations and knowing when to let someone else speak and to empower others, and that's a great skill to have. But also you need to know when to speak up and when to be okay with being the only person of color in the room and rocking it, and being the only woman on, if we're on stage. I've been on so many panels where I've been the only female there, and being okay and confident in myself. And it's something that I'm constantly working on. I'm constantly readjusting, but being confident in myself.
Thank you all. So just for the audience, would each of you give 2 sentences about exactly what you do so people have a little more context? And Joy, just go for it.
2 sentences, that's going to be hard. So we are a collaborative design firm. So what that means for us is we operate as public involvement. So we help with urban designers, architecture, engineers, city government, and we help them figure out a way to grow more equitably. So we specialize in the complex spatial issues associated, I'm over time, I'm sorry, it's associated with racial, cultural, and ethnic inequality. So we bring equity to the table.
So you work with gentrification issues a lot, I guess?
Yes, lots of gentrification issues of public space, how you operate in it. We want to make sure that people are actually designing their spaces, and we believe that we're all experts in what our space should look like and what our community should look like. So we empower citizens and community members to actively participate.
One quick follow-up for you before we get to you guys. So, the City of Portland and My Memorial Trust and a lot of other important institutions are very serious about equity right now. What's your take on sort of the status of the evolution of equity in Portland, Oregon?
Yeah, I'm smiling because I think we're at a point where it could become a catchphrase. I think a lot of people are saying it. They're hiring equity strategists or equity coordinators, and I think we really need to have a really honest conversation of what that looks like and what that looks like for Portland, and sync up our definitions, to tell you the truth. I think it's a great thing. I think I'm happy that we've moved from only celebrating our differences in certain spaces to actually allowing for difference to be embedded in everything that we do.
Awesome.
So Loopedworks is a brand, a design brand that upcycles excess materials and creates bags and accessories out of them. And we take those products and those processes and partner with large companies and move them towards a circular economy.
I guess I'm here on the role of, I'm a founder of Hannah Anderson, which is a children's clothing brand here in Portland. We sold it maybe even more than 10 years ago now, but it's still around, and it's has about 60 stores cross-country today, but it's still mainly mail order. So after my career at Hannah, I have been a lot involved in impact investing and in serving on board of companies who are pushing the boundary between for-profit and non-profit, such as Mercy Corps and EcoTrust.
Awesome. So what Gunn is, obviously too modest to say, is that Hannah Anderson was sourcing materials responsibly and providing family-friendly workplace and policy stuff, and all this before the term corporate social responsibility was even around. She was not an early adopter. She and her husband Tom were the inventors of this way of thinking. I mean, she is a global leader in this field, and she... All right. Now,
Still much more work to be done, however.
well, we live in interesting times, ladies and gentlemen. It's kind of all hands on deck, is it not? So, here are the hard questions. That was all the softball stuff. So Peter Drucker famously said, management is doing things right, leadership is doing the right thing, and the visionary founder may not have a lick of management skills. In fact, as a guy who works with a lot of them, I can attest that sometimes entrepreneurs are the worst managers in the history of the galaxy. And somehow, both the management and leadership functions, seeing out ahead and making things run well, have got to be integrated if you're going to be a real viable, if the margins are going to be there, you have to dial the whole equation in. So I'd love for each of you to say something about what you learned about that polarity and the dynamic tension there.
Whew, that was a softball, is it mine? I think I learned a lot about management when I managed my childcare providers in the beginning. I have a business degree. I've been in business a long time before we started Hannah. But when it's your own business, it's different. And I started, obviously I don't come from this country, so I started a business in a country that was a foreign country for me. So I feel like I then learned how to rely and lean on the people I worked with for advice more than I would have done if I had been in Sweden. I can't figure out anything more to say. But.
That's fine.
When I'm building my team out, I try and always hire people that are smarter than me at pretty much everything. And I think management, the leadership piece of it to me is inspiration and vision. And how do you keep that out there and keep that in the forefront of what's happening, so keeping people inspired. But that doesn't happen on every day in a day-to-day in a small office with a small team. That's, you try and infuse that and sprinkle it in and take the right breaks and the right moments to do that. The management piece of it to me is really treating people like people and, deferring to their expertise and working with them. The challenges around management are, at the end of the day, if there is a subject where you don't see eye to eye, you got to make the call. So that's the only difference to me, other than, from a management perspective, we're not really, I try and really let the team run their specific knowledge bases.
For me, I don't have a business background. I knew how to do the work, and I had to learn how, through this process of entrepreneurship, learn how to manage a team and learn how to navigate this very scary thing that, it's a very scary thing if that's not your background. And I had to read a lot of books. There's one in particular, when you asked this question, that really called to me. I read this book, which I'm blanking on the author, but The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And for me, I really, really wanted to make sure, and we're a small team of 5, that we foster this relationship where we feel comfortable disagreeing, and we feel comfortable arguing at times, and we advocate for each other, and we understand each other. And it was something we had to try out, like I said earlier, see what worked, see what didn't, and also just really being, really understanding my employees on a personal level. I think some of my employees like to just run off and they do their own thing. They're very independent, and some need some more help to get to that point. So I had to learn the management side. The leadership side, I think, like you mentioned earlier, it's about that vision, it's about the idea, it's holding yourself accountable, but it's different when you do it in practice.
I think one last thing to add on that, sorry, go ahead, is that on the management side of things, I think a lot of people expect that conflict is not something, if you have conflict, that's a bad thing. And in actuality, I think conflict, in a lot of cases, can be good because it shows that people are passionate about what they're doing. And it's not that they're just trying to win an argument, they're passionate about what they're doing.
Well, something comes to mind. I want to quote an investor that I heard, and he said, "I have seen many brilliant business plans, but I have seen very few good executions." So it's all in the execution.
That's very Peter Drucker. It's a 75% execution, 25% strategy. It doesn't matter how great your idea is if you can't make the idea real. And I read an interesting piece recently called The Problem with Good Ideas. And that ideas actually drain value out of a system if they can't be executed. And yet we're all so enamored, the shiny bright light in the next big idea. And it's one of the dangers that we all face. So next question. John Doerr is probably the most famous venture capitalist out there. He's the guy who made the early bets on Amazon and eBay and Google. And I read a hilarious piece that in Fast Company, and he said, look, people come into the Kleiner Perkins conference room here in Silicon Valley on Sand Hill Road, and they think that they're selling us on the technology or the product or the algorithm or the cool new thing. But actually, we're not looking at that at all. We're looking at them. We're looking at the team. And because we know that the product and the service will change, or you will have to pivot, or it'll all be different. But we want to know not only who those people are who are going to manage the business, but how they're going to manage each other, and not just who they are as individuals, but who they are and their dynamics between them. In other words, the organizational culture, all the dynamism of the people. And I'd love for the three of you all to say something about how you understand the importance of organizational culture in high performance.
Well, I started Han Anderson with my husband, and my biggest fear was that we would just not be able to work together. That didn't turn out to be true at all. He was fabulous to work with. We had very different skills. But so we talked a lot about what kind of company we wanted to create, and we said we wanted to create a company where we wanted to work, a company where we could be who we were, a company that we could have a life outside the company, and a company where our children was not put aside, so a family-friendly culture, if you want.
From inside of our world, our team is I'm really proud of the team that we have, and I'm very fortunate to have the team that we have. And the way that we did it was looking at each individual piece of it and saying, who is the expert in this area who can really manage that piece of the puzzle? The way that we look at how that organization continues to grow, because we are growing and we're adding more people, and it changes the dynamic. that is, I think, part of growing pains, and what happens with that is, from my perspective, the main thing, that's when you get back to being a leader, and instead of not as much on the management side of it, where you're really looking at making sure that everybody understands the end goal, where we're going and why we're doing it. That's the big piece. The why behind it is really important. And I think if you get those two things right, and everybody in your team can really nail that and recite it and say, this is why we're doing this, and they're totally on board with it, a lot of the dynamics around the organization and how you manage that organization start to kind of fall away.
Are you a fan of Simon Sinek's TED Talk, Start with the Why?
I am, yes.
Man, you stole mine. That was going to be, yeah, same thing, starting with the why. I mean, that TED Talk and the book really was something that we read and we focused, and we all made sure that we understood why we are here. And I mean, our team is really essential. I mean, we don't sell a product, we sell our skill set, we sell our expertise, we're strategists. So for me, I wanted to make sure that we fostered a community among all the colleagues, that we felt like we could, again, yell at each other, like I mentioned before, that we felt okay with investigating and not having all the answers. And I think that's why, again, we wanted to be a lab. We wanted to investigate. We wanted to constantly have this kind of, I don't know, this kind of just, we wanted to constantly move, and we didn't want to get stuck on a path that wasn't well. So for us, it's really about starting with the why and making sure we're flexible.
I do have a real quick story on that happened when I was presenting to a certain investor group that basically ran on data science and big data and plugging numbers in, and they had you come in and fill out a form basically on everything about your company, and they had the contrary opinion that the management team, in all the history of all management teams, was only a plus or minus 12% in if you had a good one versus a not a good one on the success of the company. So they would walk in and they would literally plug in data points and map your company and tell you if you were green lighted or not to move on without meeting any of the management team. So be careful because technology is coming, and hopefully that's not the way it's going, but there are people out there that have that mindset.
So that's a great segue to money. Let's talk about money. I worked with a startup for 7 years, and they went through pretty much organizational hell, dealing with the priorities of their investors, and there were some hidden agendas there that didn't surface until later, and of course we were all in it for the right reasons and for a better world, and then the numbers weren't looking quite the way that, I mean, there's a lot, and you can't make anything happen without resources, and that's in the private sector. But in the nonprofit sector, there's also capital startup, which comes from the foundation community, which is R&D for the social sector. And all the dynamics around money are really, really complicated. And I'd love for the three of you to just hit that one.
That's a big one. Well, I used to have two quotes that I used at Hannah all the time. And the first one is, money will come to you if you do the right thing. And that's sort of been my guiding star. It's, if you focus too much on the money, yes, you have to make money to stay in business. But if that's your main focus, I prefer to say money will come to you if you do the right thing. The other quote, I said a couple of times, and I even said it on TV, and my PR advisor at the time said, don't ever use that quote again. But since I'm not on any TV program here, I will tell you. So money is like manure. If you pile it up, it can smell really bad. But if you spread it out, it can do a lot of good.
LoopedWorks is a certified B Corporation. Are you guys familiar with what that means? Is everybody kind of, okay. That was kind of our I guess the wall that we put up, so to speak, between us and how we would do our financing is that, you know, for us, everything needs to be mission aligned, and capital is no different. And So that wall is more of it's a testing ground for, is this the right opportunity for us? Is it the right partner for us? Whether it's capital and partnerships or customers or the way that we run the business or the people that we hire. So that piece of it, if people are mission aligned, and fortunately what's happening in the marketplace is there are more and more mission aligned funds, angel investors, individuals, and super angels that are kind of coming into this fold, where I think, and it really makes sense if you look back at it and you say, hey, I made a lot of money in my life. That's great. What's your legacy? What do you want your money to do when you're gone? And how do you grow the next piece of that puzzle so that the world's set up to be a better place? And I think there's a lot of people out there that are starting to come to that realization where I'm not just going to throw it in my Charles Schwab account and let it go and see what happens. They're starting to really actively look for these, and the structures are being put in place for it. So that's an exciting time for everybody in this room, because there are so many businesses being launched, and there's so many entrepreneurs, and there's so many opportunities that the marketplace is so crowded that I think you need, at certain points, you have to be able to prove your concept, and the money will come to you, but you need money at certain points as you grow your company. And if it's mission aligned, man, that's really key to the whole thing.
I want to talk about something that's probably less nice. As an African American, and a daughter of a preacher, I didn't have generational wealth. So it wasn't, and I'm constantly working with great innovators who are privileged enough and great intentions and have the opportunity to take some of their savings or borrow money from friends and from family and put money down and really take this leap of faith. But for me, I didn't have that. I didn't have my parents aren't very rich, so I didn't have the opportunity to do that. And for me, this opportunity, as owning my own business, is opportunity to create wealth for my family and to pass that along. So knowing that, we applied for many, many competitions and contests, and luckily enough, we were selected last year as one of PDC's Startup Challenge winners with along 6 other companies, and that really helped us move us forward, and as well as echoing green. So I guess kind of like advice, and then also throwing it out there, but you don't have to have wealth to start a company, and there's great resources out there for you, but you do also have to be aware of your own barriers as well as your competitors and how their advantages with money and having investments. As a design firm, we typically aren't, typically we don't really go head to head with other investment or firms that are more, I guess, sexy towards investment. Like, we don't have a product. So I think we have a really good hustling mentality, and we try to work really hard, and we make sure that we reach out when we can to friends and family.
Can I probe a little bit on that? So you're an African American. You're from Cincinnati. You moved to Portland, Oregon. It's the whitest city in America.
It is.
And you're a black female entrepreneur. I mean, what's it like here for you?
Oh, that's a good question. It's hard. I would be lying if I said it was easy. What is it, the 6th whitest state in the country? And I moved here from New York City before I got here, so that didn't really help, because there's so much diversity and difference. I got really spoiled to it. But yeah, you create great relationships. You try to, I guess, find a community and move forward. But again, there's barriers. I am not attacking, but I'm trying to be innovative in a space that's predominantly white male. I mean, urban planning, urban design. There's not a lot of people who look like me who work in that field. And it's scary and it's frustrating at times. And I find myself constantly being the only person of color, constantly being the only person under 30. And I have to just stand tall and push through it and know that my ideas matter and that I deserve to be in the space. And it's funny, every time I go to a meeting or I go to a panel like this, and I'm constantly looking at myself in the mirror and saying, I deserve to be here. And I think it's really important for us to have that idea when we walk into spaces that maybe they don't feel comfortable with us and we don't feel comfortable there.
Oh, she deserves to be here. So we have 10 minutes left, and I want to sort of shift gears here a little bit. some point along in my own life, I was shown two overlapping circles, inner journey, outer journey. And I realized that for a whole lot of people, those don't touch, or they barely touch. And then in some places, maybe they overlap too much. And what I began to understand was that a healthy human life and a meaningful human life is where they overlap just enough that there's a beautiful almond shaped in the middle of those. And that's called the Majorca in Greek. And it's also what Buddhists would call right livelihood. It's the place where your inner values and your inner journey find expression in your outer work. And it's the place where what happens in the outer world and what you do reinforces and nourishes your own spirit. Now, this may sound a little woo-woo to you, but I think it's important to talk about this because entrepreneurs they wake at 3 o'clock in the morning and they have to look in the mirror and they struggle. And every one of you in the room and every one of us up here has an inner journey as well as an outer journey. There's a beautiful quote by the Christian theologian. I'm not promoting Christianity here, but I love this quotation. The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. Where your deep gladness, your inner journey, and the world's deep hunger and need meet. So without, making this a spiritual conversation per se, I'd love for the three of you all to talk about how you manage that almond in the middle, that place, where meaning and purpose matter to you.
Well, the older I get, the more important that becomes. But if I look back in my, when I was very active at HANA, I became part of a group called Social Venture Network, and we met twice a year. And at those conferences, we had spiritual leaders there as well. So that's the first time that I realized that business can be spiritual. So one of the people who came was Ram Dass, and some of you might have heard of him. I think he's still alive. But he was, I bought all his tapes and I listened to them whenever I could. So he really put me on a very different path, and I'm utterly grateful for that. Now I practice yoga, practice meditation, and helps get through the day.
I think that I look back on that question from why did I start LoopedWorks in the first place? And it was a pretty simple thing. At the point that I was at, I had 2 young kids and I was traveling 75% of the time. And I was contributing to the problems that we're now trying to fix by working for a very large athletic sportswear company. And I looked in the mirror, who remains nameless. And I looked in the mirror and I said to myself, first of all, I see these problems that are happening and I'm contributing to them. And every time I come home from a business trip, I fight with my family for 2 days until we get back into the groove because I'm gone all the time. And that's not where I wanted to be as a father. It was not where I wanted to be as a husband. It was not where I wanted to be as, what am I going to do with my life? So I did the smart thing and started my own company, right? No. Of course that's going to free up all my time. But what I did do in that process, and Gun had mentioned this, was, I set up the goals for myself. I wanted to have balance in my professional life, in my family life, and my personal life. And I wanted to be able to spend more time, travel less, and be physically, not just physically present, but mentally and emotionally present. And that's a hard space to get to. And entrepreneurship doesn't really help that, but it gets you on the first part of that, which was the physical presence. I'm here now. And then the next challenges and the constant challenges are how do you be emotionally and mentally present. And part of that, to me, is making sure that your work has purpose. And if you feel like your work has purpose, that's what everybody wants, and we all want that feeling of what I'm doing matters. And I think if you have that purpose, it makes it a lot easier to recognize when you turn around and you look at your personal life, have this great purpose at work. What do I need to do at home to feel the same way?
You probably love the quote, "The purpose of life is a life of purpose."
I agree with both of you. I wish that I had a great answer for that question. I'm constantly seeking balance. I'm constantly trying to make sure that I am going to enjoy my last few years in my 20s and, I don't know, not have an ulcer or something like that and actually focus. But it's hard. I think, yeah, when you're passionate and you know that there's work that needs to be done, it's very difficult to not wake up at 3 a.m. and work until, I don't know, sometimes midnight and have to do it again the next day. And I think I'm constantly surrounded with great people. I try to make sure my team supports me. I try to make sure that all my friends understand, but they also nudge me a little bit when I get really consumed and I don't see them for weeks and weeks. But yeah, it's a constant journey.
So, we live in a world right now, everybody here knows, that is, I don't want to say a crisis, and I don't want to be apocalyptic, but it is an all-hands-on-deck kind of moment. And I think one of the reasons why people like us come to events like this is because we're aware that it's going to take all of us to turn this around. It's not going to come from government. That's clear. It's not going to come from business alone. That's pretty damn clear too. And it certainly cannot come from the social sector or nonprofits alone. It's just not going to get the job done. So I'd love to hear, as we close this panel, your reflections on sort of the future of public problem solving as we move into some potentially very trying times on a planet we all love very much.
Well, I prefer to be an optimist, and that gets me through the day. But I think that, as David was saying, it is all hands on deck, and it is recruiting people who are in the traditional way of thinking, to say we're all in this together, and this is serious.
I agree with you. I don't think business is going to solve all the problems, but being a B corporation, I wanted to start a company and use business as a force for good. I struggled with standing up on the soapbox as a nonprofit and saying everybody's evil and you guys are screwing up, and all that falling on deaf ears. And so what we wanted to do was fly into the belly of the beast, so to speak, and say, how do we affect change inside the system that's broken? In the last 9 months, our company has conserved more than 20 million gallons of water in the way that we function. I'm really proud of that number. 81% carbon emissions avoidance. The successes that we've had, we had a big partnership with Southwest Airlines last year where 80,000 leather seats were taken off their planes, and instead of going into landfills, we turned them into bags that people could buy, and in the process we set up reverse logistics and hired adults with disabilities and set up, worked together with nonprofits and created jobs out of that, and then did local manufacturing here in the region and said, hey, we're putting people to work. And the impact out of that was Southwest Airlines, who didn't have a single CSR person in that organization, multiple billion-dollar organization with nobody with the title sustainability or CSR in there, went from, will you take these seats, to, hey, we have an upcycling box now that if anything comes in, we'll call you. And then from taking that step to joining us in 3 different sustainability conferences, national sustainability conferences, to now signing up to be in those groups, and now they're hiring their first sustainability manager. So those kinds of impacts, to me, make it feel like it's worth it.
I'm glad you asked this question. I actually brought a quote. I was prepared to kind of answer this, but it's by the amazing Bell Hooks. If you haven't read any of her work, I suggest that you take a look. There's this quote that says, "There must exist a paradigm, a practical model for social change that includes an understanding of the way to transform consciousness that are linked to the efforts to transform structures." And I wholeheartedly believe that if we can find a way to not embed empathy in everyone, but teach others how to be empathetic and to care about each other and to collaborate, I think the key is going to be empathy and to collaborate. And I really do feel like we're on like a fork in the road. We can continue to move in this direction. And like you said before, I think we all have room to grow. The nonprofit sector, the business sector, government, we all have room to grow. And I think that if we are dedicated to this idea that we really want to change the way that we are working and we want to collaborate, I think we can do it. Yeah, I'm optimistic too.
So I'm going to leave you with two quotes. The first one you might have heard, Marshall McLuhan, 1968. "There are no passengers on spaceship Earth. We are all crew." And second, my favorite quote about leadership from Robert Burkhart. "Leadership is the inability to sit back and watch the world go to hell." Thank you all very much.